Even if you're a history buff, I'll bet you don't pay a whole lot of attention to the year 1937, although quite a few interesting things happened that year. In January, Franklin Roosevelt was inaugurated president for the second time in the U.S. Amelia Earhart, a female aviation pioneer, disappeared somewhere over the Pacific, never to be heard from again. Back home, the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco opened for the first time in 1937. In England, Neville Chamberlain was the Prime Minister and the King was George VI. And for the very first time ever, the BBC used a brand new technology called television to broadcast live his coronation. So why all the talk about 1937, a year that was in between world wars? World War I had ended about 20 years prior. World War II in Europe was about to begin in 2 years' time. There was a brewer in London called Courage Brewing Company. They would later become part of Barclay Perkins, a big brewer in London, years to come. But right now, in 1937, it's Courage Brewing Company, and they were putting out a beer called a Stout Porter. I received a copy of that recipe, and you can too. Just go to the website Shut Up About Barclay Perkins. A beer historian named Ron Pattinson runs that website, that blog, and he prints recipes every once in a while. He also has a series of very interesting books with vintage recipes, and I chose the Courage 1937 Stout Porter to make today using an old recipe with newer techniques. I'm going to try for the first time a brew in the bag today. So let's get to work. So here is my recipe as taken from the blog from Ron Pattinson called Shut Up About Barclay Perkins. It's a modern interpretation because not all of the malts used at that time are available today. Now how this usually works is here's my hot liquor tank. That's for heating up my sparge water. This is the mash tun for mashing the grains to convert the starches and the sugars. And this is the boil kettle. We're going to eliminate those first two and only use the boil kettle in this brew in a bag system. And I fill this up with all the water I'm going to need for the entire boil. I'm going to mash in that, right around 8 gallons. And this is the bag. I bought the one with the handles, because this goes in here. The grains go in the bag and mash for an hour, and you lift the bag out, squeeze off the excess a little bit, and now you've got your wort ready to boil. Sounds easy, but I've never done it before. So let's get going. All right, in the kettle I've got my strike water. The burner's on and we're starting to heat our strike water for the mash. I've also got my bucket hooked up to my fishing scale, and while the water is heating I'll measure out my grains and we'll start crushing those. I've got a sack of Simpson's Golden Promise. It's pale ale malt. And there's 4.5 right there. Now for the rest of my grain bill, I went to my local homebrew supply store, and they measured everything out for me in one package. So other than the base malt, I don't have to measure any more. And there's my total grain bill. case I didn't mention it, I'm going for a strike temperature, or excuse me, a mash temperature of 148. That's what the recipe calls for. And because I'm doing brew in a bag, and my entire volume of water that I'm ever going to use is in here, this is going to be a real thin mash. Normally in a batch sparge, when I'm mashing with about half this water and then sparging with the last half, that's a thicker mash, and I'll set a strike temperature about 10 degrees above where I want my mash temperature to be. But because I'm using such a big volume of water, and I'm totally guessing here, instead of 10 degrees above, I'm going to go about 4 or 5 degrees, about half of that. 152 is what I want my strike temperature to be. So I'll turn the flame off and we'll start getting ready to mash. Again, I've never done brew in a bag before. I just bought this bag yesterday. And he asked me if I wanted to spend $5 extra and get the one with the handles. I said, hell yeah, I want handles. Handles have to be better, right? Take a couple of spring clamps. I think I got one more somewhere. I've experimented before in the past having someone pour slowly while I stir, and I've also just dumped the whole grain bill into the strike water. And I find that clumping is no worse or no better using either method. So there. I don't see any dough balls. That's my entire grain bill. A little over 7 pounds of crushed grains, and I'm going to add close to another pound of various sugars. Let me check my mash temperature. That's going to be the proof of the pudding. As soon as I find my thermometer. There it is. Again, when I started, I actually got to 153.5 for my strike water, higher than I anticipated. I'm targeting 148 for mash temperature, and I'm at 151.4. Wow. So I only lost like 2 degrees using this big, huge volume of water. That's okay. I'm within medium body range. It's a great mash temperature, probably higher than you want for a stout or a porter, and this is a stout porter. Should be a little bit drier. I'm at 151. In an uninsulated, I'm going to leave it open, mash tun. It'll drop as it mashes. It's not going to hurt anything. It's not going to be bad beer. Just a little different than I anticipated, than my target. And I learned something about brew in a bag mashing. 5 degrees over your target mash temperature is too much. So my brew timer, my mash timer, is probably going to go off any minute now. I stepped away for 15 or 20 minutes, went inside the house and grabbed a bite to eat. Came back, stirred, took a little temperature reading, and lo and behold, I've fallen below my target mash temperature of, turn that off, of 148. I was down to about 145, which isn't bad. I mean, don't worry about stuff like that. So I just turned the heat on a little bit, and I'm back up to 149, so I'm good. There it goes. The timer. That means I'm going to turn the heat back on and mash out. I'm going to turn this up to about 168 or so. So, don't know if you can see. I mean, it's kind of dark over here in this corner of the garage, but that's got a nice color. And my temperature now 168, 169.3. Okay, I'm going to turn the heat off and we'll let this sit here for about 15 minutes to mash out. Okay, so I've mashed out now. That's a little hot. Here's the part that has me a little squirrely, and that's lifting out this bag. Since I'm by myself, it could be an issue. I've got 7¼ pounds of grain in here, and I positioned my kettle in one of the worst places possible. I can't use a ceiling joist for leverage. Hopefully, I'll be able to get this out far enough to put this grill grate that I purchased at the store the other day. I thought this might come in handy. And it looks like it might. Yeah, this grain bill's not a problem. If I was doing a 10-gallon batch with a larger grain bill, I might have an issue. But this is pretty good. And I'm just going to let this sit here for a while and let whatever will drip out, drip out. And in the meantime, I'll get my fire going because, again, the really cool thing about this method is that all my water is already in the boil kettle. I'm not moving, measuring, heating batches and batches of water. I am having a hard time getting my glove off though. Now the hop additions for this beer, pretty easy. It's a 90-minute boil and there are 1.31 ounces for 90 and a little over a half an ounce for the last 15. Instead of adding the hops directly to the kettle, I've got this hop bag that I made out of a piece of sewer pipe, PVC, and a piece of 1/2-inch PVC pipe. I attach a bag, paint strainer bag, with a large ring clamp, and I've drilled a couple of holes through here that the pipe goes through, and that just balances on the edge of the kettle like that. I can add my hops right to the top. I can lift this off for stirring. I find that it works really well. Alright, now that the boil is underway, the first addition of hops has been added. The boil, remember, is for 90 minutes. And the directions, the recipe didn't say when to add the dry malt extract and the brown sugar. So I let it boil for about half an hour so that those additions will boil for 60 minutes. I'm going to add those now. Here's the dry malt extract. It's not a lot, a couple of ounces. And the brown sugar. And this is half a pound. Alright, there's the timer. There are a couple of things I'm going to do the last 15 minutes of the boil. One of them is start moving wort from the boil kettle through the pump into the plate chiller, and then recirculate it back into the boil kettle just to sanitize all of these parts one last time, even though I did that earlier before the brew session started. And then I'm going to put my last 15-minute addition of hops in and finish the boil. Alright, I've turned the plate chiller off. It's only been 10-12 minutes or so, and it's cool to the touch. The hoses are. I haven't touched the beer. Turn the ball valves down so it's not flowing out quite so fast. And I'm slowly filling my carboy fermenter. All that's left to do after racking into the fermenter is take it in the house and pitch the yeast. I started with dry yeast, Nottingham, and rehydrated it in some water, 4 ounces, about 85 degrees, and I'll pitch that inside, put on the airlock, and let her go for about a week or more.